Hey there, you awesome people! I hope your day has been nothing short of fantastic. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Had Green Lightning. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you're totally vibing with this what if scenario, drop me a comment and let your thoughts be known. And while you're at it, don't miss out on other mind-blowing what ifs on this channel. Alright, without further ado, let's dive straight into this video. Unfortunately, this caused Izuku to take the full hit from Muscular, a slight cracking indicating at least one broken rib. Izuku was then launched into the mountain, his back slamming into the side and some blood being coughed up in the process. Izuku! Kota called in terror. Are that brat's Izuku? Damn, can't kill him too bad, boss wants the brat for whatever reason. Muscular sighed. Guess you'll have to do for a kill, Muscular said, turning to Kota with a malicious glint. Kota's eyes were streaming with tears as Muscular reached over. Suddenly, Izuku shot out from the mountain, the amount of power in his jump causing the crater he was in to deepen into the mountainside as he screeched at Muscular. Don't you dare touch him! Muscular seemed surprised as he pulled his quirk-enhanced arm up to shield himself from the impact. Whilst it protected him from the high levels of physical impact, it did little to shield him from the lightning Izuku sent through him. The lightning, whilst not fatal and hardly doing anything to the massive villain, it definitely irritated him for long enough for Izuku to recover somewhat, and take a more advantageous position. In that time, Kota also managed to get away somewhat, however did not get that far. So you're still up and going, kiddo? Well then, maybe I can kinda kill you and the boss won't mind too much. I'll grab that Katsuki kid, yeah that'll have to do, Muscular said as he returned to his boxer's stance. Izuku by this point was aware of Muscular's fighting method, and kept his eyes on his biceps, waiting for which one began overflowing with muscle fibers. Now then, show me your blood! Muscular screamed, both arms overflowing with the fibers. Izuku, acting on instinct, protected his face as Muscular crashed into him. Using large amounts of lightning in his legs and body as a whole, large arcs continued coming off of him. Despite this, he was being pushed down, not back, he noted. He did his best to push back, but it was too little too late as Muscular pushed him into the ground. Izuku didn't register Kota's cries as he was pressed into the ground, a large crater forming around him. He only vaguely registered the rocks pressing against him as he felt his consciousness begin to slip away. Kachan, Najire, Kota, I'm sorry, Izuku thought as he began to lose the battle against his mind. Kota was in tears. He had just seen Izuku be covered in various burns, bruises and cuts in protection of him before being hit really hard into the ground. It was heartbreaking to the young boy. Izuku! Kota screamed as Muscular punched him into the ground. Izuku! Did you torture my parents as you killed them too? Oh yeah, definitely. They wanted to stop me from having fun, so I had to get them out of the way. You understand, right kid? You just want to have fun, don't you? Muscular responded casually, as though he wasn't currently crushing Izuku. Kota was panicking further now. He didn't know what to do, and his mind was haywire. He noticed Izuku's signature green lightning stop arcing from underneath Muscular. Instinct took over, and he could feel the pressure of his quirk building up in his hands. He pointed his hands towards Muscular, and released the water. The pressure wasn't much, and he couldn't do it for long, but it was enough to get Muscular's attention. You little brat! You that desperate to join your parents? Fine, let me finish up here first, Muscular said, distracted by the water hitting his back. Kota began tearing up again as Muscular turned around to glare at him, a massive fist pulled back. Kota closed his eyes tight and waited for the impact, but it never came. Instead, Izuku was standing behind Muscular with his hand holding the fist that was wound back. You won't hurt him! Izuku screamed, even more lightning flowing off of him as he gripped the fist tightly. Kota was smiling through his tears. Izuku was okay. And saving him, Kota could see Muscular freeze with green lightning flowing through him. The green lightning gathered most at the masses of muscles from the man's quirk, before a loud booming of thunder filled the air. At the same time, Kota saw the quirk-produced muscle fibers of the man explode, Izuku using the green lightning to do so. Ah, you little brat, that really hurts, I'm gonna kill you, Muscular said, turning back to face Izuku. In response, Izuku positioned himself so that Muscular was between him and the cliffside, and Kota noticed Izuku had cupped his hands much like Bakugo would when firing off a large blast. Another loud boom resonated from Izuku as a strike of green lighting fired from his hands. The lightning struck Muscular directly in his torso, the blow causing a large scorch mark to appear. It resulted in Muscular being pushed back slightly, stunning him. Before he could recover, Izuku had jumped forward and once he was in front of Muscular, placed a hand right in front of his chest, and released another blast. This one, however, was larger and rather than a single concentrated lightning bolt, came as a large blast more reminiscent of one of Bakugo's blasts. Difference was, Izuku's blast was green and rather than a solid orange of fire, an inconsistent green that had many breaks, such is the nature of lightning. However, it served the same purpose, as it sent Muscular flying back into the mountain. Muscular promptly hit his now unprotected head hard against the mountain as he crashed into the crater Izuku was in only a few moments. Kota watched in awe as Muscular was sent even deeper into the mountain, at least a foot in. Muscular remained stuck, unmoving despite a faint rise and fall of his chest as Izuku turned back to Kota with a smile. Kota rushed towards Izuku and wrapped his arms around Izuku's waist, which was still hard to reach for him. Izuku gently picked the boy up, and it was now Kota noticed that Izuku's arms were covered in burns, and there was a small amount of blood coming from the older boy's head. "I'm okay, Kota, come on, let's get you back to Mandalay and Pixie Bob," Izuku said, giving the boy his best reassuring smile. Kota just nodded tearfully, and hopped on Izuku's back as Izuku jumped back towards where he was last with the other students and teachers. Izuku had collected Kota, and ignoring the slight throbbing in his head and the stinging of his arms, he was fine. Or at least, relatively fine. It could be worse. He could have broken his arms beyond repair, for instance. Regardless, with Kota on his back he jumped through the air back towards Aizawa-sensei and the pussycats. It didn't take too long, and soon he was able to get a good view of what was going on in the forest. As he landed, ignoring the growing numbness in his legs from using his quirk in them all the time, he skidded slightly. He made sure to take the brunt of the impact as he slid beside Aizawa-sensei. "Izuku, you got Kota, good. I've given all students permission to use quirks if needed. Did you have to fight anyone?" Aizawa-sensei asked, wide awake and eyes brimming with worry. "Yes, I had to fight Muscular. It seems the League of Villains have gotten their hands on some much stronger minions," Izuku responded as he helped Kota off of his back. He took a glance at the forest. They were near the edge of it, but he could still see that it was burning, more than a little. "Aizawa-sensei, Kota may be able to help put the forest fires out. He has a water quirk. I'm going to go help the others," Izuku said, running off. Aizawa-sensei could do little except nod as he went back towards the main buildings to find Blood King and Seordinate with Kota on his back. Izuku went back towards where all the students were initially, trying to find the pussycats. He gritted his teeth. "Please be okay, Ka-chan." Izuku had just handed Kota to Aizawa-sensei before rushing over to where the pussycats were. Once there, he saw Mandalay being threatened by a highly inefficient sword. Maybe not really a sword, but he wasn't so worried about the terminology. As he came down, he kicked straight through the creation, rendering it unusable and landed on the ground. Izuku slid around to stand by Mandalay's side. "Izuku, did you save Kota?" she asked, panic in her eyes. "Yes, he's with Aizawa-sensei. Can you deliver a message to the classes?" Izuku asked, his eyes on the reptilian quirked human that once wielded the sword abomination. Mandalay nodded, and Izuku continued. "They have a target to kidnap, Ka-chan." Mandalay looked in shock as he finished, before broadcasting the message. "All students, heed this message. As you have already been informed, you have permission to fight quirks free, but we have received information that they are seeking to kidnap Ka-chan. Please keep them in eye at all times and try to avoid situations that could potentially result in their kidnap as you return to camp ASAP." Mandalay broadcasted. "Are you fit to continue?" she asked Izuku. "Yeah. I'm going into the forest to help out," he told her as he ran past the reptilian human, sticking out his left hand and shocking them as he passed them. "I'll try and stay safe." Izuku faintly heard Mandalay taking down and restraining Spinner as he collapsed onto the ground. He continued running into the forest, when he heard a crashing noise. He turned his head to the noise, and he could see trees being crushed. A villain? No, they would have used them to directly attack the camp. And there's only one student with the potential to do that, Izuku thought as his eyes widened when the massive shadow came into sight. Tokoyami. Izuku could faintly see two massive red eyes, and only thanks to his quirk could he make out his bird-headed classmate being completely overwhelmed by his shadow-based quirk, which was now letting out a tremendous roar. As he stood in shock, he felt the tap on his shoulder as a mouse started speaking. "Izuku, should you be back at camp resting? Your arms look pretty beat up." Shoji asked him through one of his appendages. It's fine. What's going on with Tokoemi? He asked. Shoji sighed, looking over at the rampaging shadow creature. We were traveling through the forest when we were ambushed. On instinct I wrapped him up and dived into a bush. I'm sure you've heard his training. It left Dark Shadow in a more riled up state than normal. Shoji explained as the two ducked into some bushes to avoid the ongoing rampage. So being trapped in the dark during the night probably wasn't a good idea. Furthermore, I got injured. It seems that Tokoemi's intense emotions resulted in this. Shoji finished, showing his currently injured appendage. I want to save my friend. But I'm assuming you want to go save Bakugo. What will you do, Izuku? Shoji asked as the green-haired boy considered his choices. Both. I know how we can save both of them. Izuku responded, as he began telling Shoji the plan. Bakugo was more than a little miffed. He was honestly looking forward to be able to improve his raw quirk, allowing him to develop himself further. Unfortunately, the camping trip ended up like one of the horror movies he watches, with it being disrupted and turned into a horror show. Ironic, Bakugo thought as he avoided yet another of the massive spikes, made of teeth. It sounded and reacted like metal though. It was hard to tell. The camp horror game ended in genuine horror. Everyone should survive though, if their only goal is to kidnap me. Bakugo though, glancing to Todoroki at his right who had a Class 1B student on his back. Todoroki released an ice glacier to try and stop the villain, only succeeding in temporarily halting them as they broke through the ice quickly with carefully targeted strikes from the powerful tooth blades. Bakugo scared and restrained his explosions to nothing more than small sparks. Bakugo, we can't use fire or your explosions in the forest, Todoroki told him. Yeah, I know that, icy hot. Bakugo snapped back, the two side by side at the moment. My ice isn't enough to take them down though. We'll need to retreat and find more brute force, someone like Kirishima. Bakugo just rolled his eyes. Yeah, but how the fuck are we meant to do that? Bakugo told Todoroki as they dodged another attack from the villain's teeth. And if Izuku was able to get that information, he's probably already taken down some high-level fucker. Damn it, Bakugo thought, this time rolling away to the left, whilst Todoroki jumped to the right. Well, we can't keep going like this, Todoroki called back as the two regrouped once more. Todoroki produced another large glacier to stall the villain, so the two could take a breather. Without warning, a deafening crashing noise paired with the sound of trees being uprooted echoed through the area, gathering the attention of the two hero students and villain alike. They were rewarded with the sight of Izuku, with burns on his arms and green lightning arcing off of him, running side by side with Shoji, who had one of his appendages cut and bleeding. Bakugo and Todoroki were confused, unlike the villain who began mumbling, before releasing a barrage of teeth at the two newcomers. Flesh, the villain mumbled, as the sharp edges of the teeth were a few seconds away from making contact. Bakugo and Todoroki were stunned, unable to act. However, Izuku and Shoji seemed unfazed. The reason became apparent as a massive, rampaging dark shadow came from behind them, swatting away the villain's attack. How could you? You deny me of my flesh! The villain cried out, sending an attack towards one of Dark Shadow's eyes. It proved ineffective of doing anything beyond irritating the massive shadow creature. Begone, you inconsequential insect, the creature announced, swatting the villain into one of the trees. Hard. The tree was knocked over, and the villain sufficiently knocked out. Dark Shadow turned its attention towards the hero students, roaring at them. Ka-chan! We need light! The rest of the forest is already on fire, but do keep it limited, Izuku called out to him. Bakugo nodded and smirked, cupping his hands. Flash bang grenade, he announced, before releasing a thin, incredibly bright explosion. Todoroki, Shoji and Izuku all shielded their eyes from the resulting effect as Dark Shadow shrieked. The sentient quirk quickly shrunk, hiding back inside of Tokoemi, who was currently curled up on the ground. Bakugo, Izuku. Thank you. I apologize for the outburst, Shoji, Tokoemi said. He seemed to be in some kind of pain, probably related to quirk overuse. Shoji scooped him up and carried him on his back in what appeared to be like a cocoon. Right, we need to go back to camp, Todoroki announced. Izuku and Shoji nodded in agreement as Bakugo sked. Bakugo, walk in the center of us so we can all keep an eye on you. I and Shoji will be in front, Izuku can be behind, Todoroki told him. Bakugo sighed and did as instructed, and the students began moving together. Izuku, are you okay? Bakugo asked, gesturing to his arms. It was clear he had used a lot of energy, and it was surprising he wasn't suffering a painful headache. "Yeah, I'll be fine," Izuku responded, stretching his arms. Bakugo didn't fail to notice his wince of pain, but Izuku insisted he would be fine. Bakugo could only hope so. Despite the tense atmosphere, there was a casual conversation flowing almost naturally, and they moved quickly. They faintly heard a cry of "Achiko!" from Tsu, and without hesitation the group ran towards the area of the source. Once there, they noticed Uraraka pinned down by an unknown blonde, using a device to drain what looked to be about a liter of blood. The blonde noticed their presence, however seemed to be distracted by something else, before focusing back on the group. Bakugo moved first, forcing the blonde off of Uraraka whilst Todoroki tried to cut off their escape. Once this happened, Tsu went to check on the downed girl, who looked a little pale. "It was fun making friends with you, Cheiko and Tsu. Hope we get to meet again," the blonde said, slipping out of Bakugo's grip and disappearing into the forest before Todoroki could trap her in ice. "Thank you, Bakugo, Shoji, Tokoyami and Todoroki," Tsu said before Uraraka echoed it. Uraraka leant on Tsu as she looked around. "Have you guys met anyone else along the way?" Uraraka asked. "Yeah, there was Izuku," Bakugo replied, looking around. "Where's Izuku?" "Ah, that would be on my part." A villain introduced themselves. "I am Mr. Compress, and dash, where the fuck is Izuku?" Bakugo cut him off. "Geez, I can see why you were on the list. But I believe the boss will be more satisfied with the cheat code than you," Mr. Compress explained, whilst holding up a small blue marble. Todoroki noticed this, and he quickly unleashed a large glacier in an attempt to freeze the villain. Unfortunately, it only succeeded in driving them away, as they used the glacier as a platform to propel themselves with, pushing away towards wherever they were meant to meet up. "God damn it! Fuck, Bakugo yelled, slamming the ground before Todoroki tapped his shoulder. Uraraka came up with a plan. "Aji is going to launch myself and you towards them, after Uraraka makes us weightless. Tokoyami and Shoji will stay here with them and the 1B student as they go back to camp," Todoroki explained quickly. "What fucking ever, let's just get Izuku back," Bakugo shouted back as he and Todoroki got touched by Uraraka. Soon after they were flung through the air by Tsu's tongue, and after a moment Bakugo locked onto a landing point, where it looked like there were a few villains gathering. They could just make out the self-proclaimed Mr. Compress landing. "Hold on, icy hot," Bakugo called out, using powerful explosions on his feet to propel them faster. They felt the familiar sense of gravity returning as Uraraka returned their gravity, and Bakugo sent them into a spin, with a landing target of Mr. Compress's back. Todoroki prepared his fire, the bright orange swirling on his arm as he targeted a random villain. Together, Bakugo and Todoroki pressed Mr. Compress into the ground, stunning him. The other villains were surprised, and remained briefly unmoving as the students searched for the marble that contained Izuku. Todoroki continued to search Mr. Compress whilst Bakugo let off several large explosions, using it to deter any advances from the group of villains. "Bakugo, I got the marble!" Todoroki called out as he let Mr. Compress go. Bakugo just nodded and prepared an explosion for their escape when Mr. Compress, now reunited with the rest of the group, snapped his fingers. Of course, a magician's true trick isn't the magic itself, but the sleight of hand and misdirection, Mr. Compress announced, revealing the collected marble to be a shard of ice. "A boy with staples and burnt skin was that?" Simply rolled his eyes as the blonde chick from earlier giggled. A portal opened up, presumably by the same dude from the USJ attack. "Come on then, we should go," the one with burnt skin said. They began turning towards the portal and Bakugo and Todoroki prepared to rush the villains again, when a bright blue beam shot past everyone. "Hey, that was pretty! That looked dangerous," a person in a black and white announced, making peculiar poses, and the beam shot past him and hit Mr. Compress in the back of the head. It successfully knocked him forward and he spat out 2 marbles. "Go right!" Bakugo screamed at Todoroki as he used explosions on his feet to get the one flying left. Bakugo successfully caught it, however watched as Todoroki barely missed. "Compress," the villain that caught it said. "Of course, as a performer, I have a flair for the dramatics," Mr. Compress replied, snapping his fingers to reveal Bakugo holding another chunk of ice, and in the other villain's grasp was Izuku. "Izuku! Give him back, you fuckers!" Bakugo screamed. "Sorry kid, but we got orders to get you or the cheat code." "Looks like we got the latter," the villain said, walking backwards with his hands around Izuku's neck. Izuku still seemed dazed, only registering Bakugo at the last moment. The last thing Bakugo saw of Izuku before he was pulled through was a smile of reassurance. But that didn't change the facts. The villains had come, and they had won. The last time Izuku remembered being out of this world was when he was briefly pulled out to be dragged through a portal. He had done his best to reassure Bakugo and Todoroki through a smile, and if he were properly registering everything around him, he may have noticed the tight grip on his throat. It wasn't long after going through the portal that he was returned to the other world. The other world was odd. It seemed like a dream with a single spotlight. The rest of the world was faded away beyond the spotlight, in which Izuku woke up under the beam of. Away from the spotlight was a faded darkness with a faint blue highlight. Occasionally the blue color would become stronger, revealing it to be a light, almost turquoise color. Additionally, the world seemed to sometimes shake violently, jolting Izuku up and down. Despite feeling pain and nausea, he failed to suffer any actual injuries from it. All Izuku was left with was a pangs of pain from wounds and jolts, and his own thoughts. Meanwhile, Bakugo had to be calmed down by Todoroki, as the two began an agonizing walk back to the rest of the group, who in a collective silence trudged back to camp. Once they made it there, they met up with a worried Aizawa-sensei, who was doing head counts of the so far gathered students with Vlad King. Tiger was keeping a hold of several captured villains, most notably Muscular, whilst Mandalay was comforting a distressed Kota. They also noticed there were a few students that weren't affected by the gas. Todoroki went quietly over to Aizawa-sensei to inform him of what happened, whilst the others dispersed to find their other friends. Bakugo eventually found Yaoyorozu placed up against a tree with a bandage around her head. Nearby was an unconscious Jiro. Yaoyorozu motioned for Bakugo to sit nearby, and the two just sat in a comfortable, if somber silence. Eventually emergency services arrived, and the students were taken home by a combination of buses, ambulances, and police cars. Yaoyorozu was taken to an ambulance whilst Bakugo was sent to one of the police cars so he could be interviewed once they got back. Once Niza had learned of the attack, the remaining teachers were gathered the next morning for a meeting regarding their next move. I am sure you have all heard by now the tragedy that has occurred on the training camp for the first-year hero courses. Niza opened with. All teachers nodded solemnly whilst an incredibly tired and anxious Aizawa just grunted. Now Aizawa, whilst I am sure you wish to be on the rescue team, I believe it would be more beneficial for you to be on the press release team. Similar goes for you, Vlad, and myself, Niza explained. Aizawa sighed in agreement, as Vlad just nodded. Simultaneously, All Might and other heroes including several top 5 heroes will conduct 2 operations. One operation is at the designated presumed location where Izuku is being held, whereas the other seems to be a facility where Nomas are held. Naturally, we will send All Might to the location where Izuku is being held, along with the Big 3 at their request, whilst we will send heroes better at crowd control and restraining to the Noma facility. Niza explained before All Might cut him off. The Big 3? He questioned. But they're just students. Students that are each arguably stronger than a majority of pro heroes. Besides, I have a feeling they may have gone without our approval if we did not include them in our plans. Niza told him. Why are they not here at the moment then? All Might questioned, not entirely convinced. They are talking to the classes at the hospital, whilst also gathering the tracker transponder from Yaoyorozu. Niza responded. I have already explained the plan to them, so it is quite alright. All Might nodded in understanding before Niza spoke. However, there is one more thing to discuss. It is evident there is a traitor among us dash. Whoa, let's not start pointing fingers. President Mike cut him off. I understand your refusal of the topic, but it is the only conclusion that we can make, Niza said. None outside of the relevant students and the Udata staff were informed of the location. I believe mixed stance is currently best, Midnight said. We should focus on the students and media image at the moment. We can deal with that issue later. Niza sighed and nodded. Indeed. Here is the plan. Bakugo sighed and clenched his fist. He was in a shared room with Todoroki, the two having just finished being checked over by doctors, and Bakugo getting a brief interview with a psychologist after request from police considering his relationship to the kidnapped. He thought he could feel blood in his hand, and he realized his knuckles were going white from clenching them so tight, his nails drawing a small amount of blood. He hissed and got up to wash it, passing Todoroki. They'll get him back, was all Todoroki said. You don't need to worry. Yeah, well, I still feel fucking useless, helpless, whatever the hell this shit is. Bakugo snapped back. Todoroki did not react, simply looking blank as ever before Bakugo's side. I want to help get him back. I'm sure I can. Bakugo told him. Todoroki simply shook his head. We would only get in the way. Trust me on this one. Bakugo scared and sat back on his bed and turned away. Whatever, I'm gonna go visit some of the others. Bakugo told the other boy, standing up again, hands clenching and unclenching. I'll come with you, Todoroki said, also rising from his own bed. Do what you want, Bakugo said, leaving the room. Eventually he found much of the rest of the class, all in one of the waiting rooms with Tamaki from the Big Three. Tamaki? Bakugo spoke up, and the shy boy turned towards Bakugo. Ah, Bakugo, Tamaki replied, with a somber tone. Neijire and Mirio are currently talking to Yaoyorozu about the tracker. Tracker? Bakugo asked, perking up. Yaoyorozu managed to place a tracker on one of the Noma. Bakugo nodded, closing his eyes in thought when Tamaki received a message on his phone. Dutifully, he announced the news to the class. You guys can go in and see Yaoyorozu now. The rest of the Big Three are there as well. They want to say something to you all. The class quickly started moving, save Jiro and Toru, who were still under effects after being exposed to a higher dosage of the gas. And soon everyone was in Yaoyorozu's room. Closest to her stood the Big Three and Bakugo. Hi everyone, Mirio started. As I'm sure you've heard by now, we are the Big Three of UAIM, more or less, the honorary leader, and we have just been getting a tracker from your classmate here. Bakugo, and the rest of his class, nodded solemnly. However, he remained agitated and spoke up quickly. Look, can you guys just say what you want so we can all talk together as a class? Mirio's smile remained ever present whilst he shot a quick glance to the increasingly anxious Neijire who Tamaki was trying to calm before glancing over the class. He noticed a few of them seemed agitated, however none more so than Bakugo. Mirio sighed before speaking. Look, whatever happens in this room will stay in here, right? Mirio asked, definitely understanding the mild uneasiness that rippled through the present members of 1A. They all glanced at each other before nodding to Mirio. Great! Answer this honestly. Raise your hands. Who is thinking of asking Yaoyorozu for a tracker to go rescue Izuku? Mirio said bluntly. He noticed a slight shuffle in some members, before saying something more. I won't tell the teachers, and will cast no judgment, but we will have a few things to tell you. Unsurprisingly, Bakugo's hand was the first to go up. Soon followed by Yaoyorozu, who was still in the bed, and Mirio noticed Ida and Todoroki share a glance before they both raised their hands as well. He remained smiling as Kirishima's hand went up as well. The class looked around in surprise and several members opened their mouths to say something before he raised his hand for silence. Myself and Neijire have a few things to say about that. Tamaki is not nearly confrontational enough for that, Mirio told them as he gazed over the class. But I will speak first while Tamaki calms Neijire. Mirio looked over to see a very agitated Neijire pacing while Tamaki talked gently in an attempt to subdue her anxiety and worry. You kids, being more experienced than most your age due to unfortunate events, believe you are capable of saving Izuku, or at least helping. But I will say this. You may be more experienced, but I am sure you understand the potential legal ramifications and additional potential issues from disrupting the work. You gotta learn to trust us as your seniors and other heroes as your superiors to be able to work with you. It'll be an important part of being a pro hero. This is a great test for all of you, to trust other heroes with the safety of your classmate. Mirio finished, and many of the class nodded in understanding. The students that raised their hands looked down, guiltily, although Bakugo seemed to remain mostly undeterred. Mirio sighed, and nodded to Neijire, who stepped up and began speaking. Alright kiddos, listen up! Now, if I spot you even looking suspicious near the target location, I will personally blast you into the next district. And then do the same after the mission. Because we don't need distractions or other complications. We'll get Izuku back. None of you need to interfere. Neijire finished by cracking her knuckles and Bakugo audibly gulped. He nodded quickly, and Mirio could see that Neijire's determination had convinced the students Izuku would be okay. The villains maybe less so. Soon after wishing Yaoyorozu well, most of the class had left as they each had their own parents pick them up to head back to their houses. Whilst Bakugo remained as his parents were being consoled and interviewed regarding potential triggers or similar, and Yaoyorozu remained in hospital due to her injuries not being fully cleared. Bakugo remained at her side, and the two engaged in conversation, trying their best to keep their minds off the topic that was obviously at hand. Bakugo could see the walls of the room, and whilst he knew they couldn't move, it felt like they were closing in on him. Kugo? Bakugo! Yaoyorozu's voice cut through his thoughts, and Bakugo clenched his fists as he looked up. What is it? You were spacing out and your breathing sped up. Are you alright? Yaoyorozu asked him, concern in her eyes. I'm fine, yeah. Bakugo replied, looking at his hands in his lap. Yaoyorozu sat up from her leant-back position and sat on the bed, legs over the edge as she looked at him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed gently. You can tell me anything you know, I'm here for you, she said to him. Bakugo just nodded and Yaoyorozu pat the spot next to her, signaling for him to sit there. Bakugo did so, if a bit aimlessly, and closer up Yaoyorozu could almost see the burning statements, questions and thoughts flying through his mind, yet all being clouded by a thin glassiness of nearing tears. Bakugo stiffened when he felt Yaoyorozu's arms wrap around him, and hesitantly wrapped his own arms around her. You don't have to stay strong around me, Katsuki. It's alright, she murmured into his ear. He barely registered his first name before his internal barriers broke down completely, and tears began pouring not moments after he rested his head on her shoulder. To her credit, she did not interrupt nor judge the broken boy as she gently rubbed circles on his back. They stayed in the embrace whilst Bakugo's tears continued to pour down. What felt like an eternity for Bakugo, what probably wasn't long enough to let out several nights of pent-up emotions for Yaoyorozu, and in reality was maybe 5 minutes. The two separated and Yaoyorozu smiled to Bakugo, who returned it with a slightly sadder one. Thank you, Momo, I really needed that. Bakugo responded, slightly out of it, and staring out the window. He could see the sun had been steadily traveling through the sky, and the sky was steadily changing to a reddish pink. Something Yaoyorozu could relate to. The two remained side by side exchanging more light conversation. However, as dusk soon began turning into night, Bakugo's phone pinged. A text from his mother. Tisk, old hag texted me OWW, what was that for? I did it in her stead, whatever. It says to turn the TV to the news channel. Yaoyorozu turned the TV on and did so, and they saw Aizawa-sensei, Nizu, and Vlad King giving a press release. They both suppressed their chuckles. Despite the grim topic matter, Aizawa-sensei cleaned up surprisingly well but still looked more annoyed with the world than ever. Bakugo shuffled closer to Yaoyorozu, as she was closer to the TV, in order to hear better, and the two listened intently to the conversation and questioning being performed. Several reporters were questioning the present 1A and 1B teachers for their decision regarding letting the students fight. Eraserhead, explain your reasoning for letting students use quirks to fight, a reporter called out. It became apparent very quickly that they were definitely on the dumber side, as all the other reporters looked exasperated because the answer to the question was basic logic. To his credit though, Aizawa-sensei did not lash out nor scold the reporters like he might have in a class, and replied simply, it was the best course of action. I fear a far worse scenario may have come to fruition if it were not for the students being able to defend themselves. But a student was kidnapped and all others injured in some form, so it became apparent that the villains had 2 targets to kidnap, and we could have ended with many dead students if it were not for their ability to react and respond to the situation appropriately. Aizawa-sensei cut them off before the other reporters attacked the one asking the questions. They moved on to other lines of questioning very quickly. Needless to say, Bakugo and Yaoyorozu were both put at ease by their teacher's confidence, and both let out sighs of relief. Yaoyorozu relaxed a little and allowed herself to lean slightly against Bakugo, who seemed to react only slightly, putting his hand around her. The two continued to watch the press release, and at some point a journalist asked probably the worst possible question. What if the kidnapped student were to join the League of Villains? Has this possibility been considered? Bakugo tensed and Yaoyorozu could feel it, and quietly slipped her hand into his and gently squeezed it as he squeezed back, his teeth grating. Thankfully for Bakugo's dentist, the question was answered swiftly by Aizawa-sensei. You have no idea who you are talking about. Izuku is one of the most dedicated students in my class. Furthermore, he is one of the most influential students in my class, always pushing others and being internally motivated to try harder. I and many others that have worked with him can further prove this to you. So don't go throwing around completely ungrounded theories. Aizawa-sensei finished, standing up and sounding far more awake as he went. The journalist gulped nervously as they nodded, whilst Nizu did his best to calm Aizawa-sensei. Vlad King began standing up to answer some questions. Yaoyorozu gently cuddled the infuriated Bakugo as he calmed down, and once he did he turned to face her, their faces incredibly close. Yaoyorozu's blush matched her hero costume and Bakugo's was a lesser tint of red. The two leaned in, eyes closed for a chaste, innocent kiss. They were both tired and emotional, but it was enough for both of them. They smiled, but it was quickly wiped off when they heard a development on the news about a major situation involving several high-ranking villains and heroes. Their faces paled, and the held hands became tighter when they saw what was on. Finally, after what had felt like an eternity, Izuku was returned to the mortal plane with a full plane and a tired mind. He was immediately blinded. Despite the incredibly dimly lit room, it was far brighter than anything he had been exposed to in. Probably only a few hours, huh? Time felt weird and he was completely disoriented, and the poking in his leg didn't help. Oh, that was a knife. Huh. There was also a slight tingling in his arms. He turned to look at them and saw them covered in burns. That could be it. He finally looked around and saw various people, whom he immediately recognized as many members of the League of Villains. Spinner, Toga, Dabi, Twice, Kurogiri, Magna, Mr. Compress, and of course Shigaraki. Immediately noticeable was Toga holding a knife covered in blood. That would explain my leg. Ow. Izuku thought, wincing slightly as he registered his placement. He was seated on a rubber chair to try and nullify most of his quirks so he couldn't feasibly escape. Susu, how are things? Izuku said, smiling at them. Toga giggled, several of them scared. Kurogiri along with Dabi remained impassive and Shigaraki became agitated. Good. The more irritated they are, the easier an escape should be, and the easier they'll be to beat in a fight. Izuku just kept smiling as Shigaraki clenched a cup before responding. You little brat, do you know what your situation is? He yelled. Izuku didn't respond, and pretended to ponder the question. Nope, could you explain it? Izuku responded, smiling at them. Izuku could have sworn he heard a chuckle but couldn't place the source as he looked around the room. Soon his eyes landed on a screen that read audio only. He didn't question it and simply continuing looking around. In all fairness, it was a fairly nice bar, if it weren't for the whole villain's base where they have me held kidnapped thing. But you know, thought that counts and whatnot. Regardless, he watched Shigaraki stand up and quickly leave, followed by a bored Kurogiri. Soon enough the other villains each retired for the night, the last to leave being Toga as Izuku quietly hummed to himself, his energy charging as much as he could. He had spent a lot during the fight with Muscular, and during the night in general. He wouldn't be able to use it yet, but he'd probably find a chance. So, you are this cheat code Shigaraki keeps whining about? A disembodied voice spoke. And that makes you his, what sugar daddy? Izuku joked, keeping his own spirits up. The voice simply chuckled, before speaking again. I suppose that is one way to look at it. However, I am simply referred to as All for One. Wow, that sounds way too intimidating to be some little pawn. I take it you're actually the one in charge? Indeed, child, you learn fast. It is a shame that you will probably become little more than a mindless Noma. But for now, you will serve as a tool to help guide him. You see, everyone when they see their peak is ending, wishes to build a continuation. All for One explained. Izuku hummed in understanding, and the man continued. A legacy, if you will. So once I finally come to an end, he will continue on in my stead. I see. Wise not, Olda? Izuku joked, absorbing the information. Haha, indeed, child. Sorry for rambling. When you are stuck with mindless creatures, and many villains, none of whom can really hold a deep conversation without bringing up some kind of violence, or how much they want to destroy something, or their desire for alcohol. Kurogiri is a very, very bad alcoholic. Doesn't make for great conversation. Well, anyway, I shall leave you to it. Enjoy your last days of life. Or not. Whatever works. All for One said before a tone sounded, signaling him shutting off whatever system connected him from somewhere to hear. Izuku sighed, bored once more. He glanced around, and figured it was a bad idea to sleep. Thinking back to biology lessons, he figured his best route would be to discreetly use his quirk to force his adrenal gland into slight overdrive, and forcibly stop anything that may make him sleepy. It hurt his head slightly, but it was better than falling asleep and his energy depleting. The night took a long time to pass. He didn't get anything done beyond some scheming and gift ideas. Also, he had a weird feeling he would win a bet tomorrow. The bet with, I think Mum, huh? Izuku thought, before shrugging it off. He stayed sitting there for a while. Based on the lack of movement, the rest of the league had gone to sleep. Probably been a big day for them. Soon morning came and Izuku was running on pure induced adrenaline and trying to figure out which receptor to block his slowly climbing headache. It was barely a tickle in comparison to what it could be, but that was probably the adrenaline as well. Oh well. Problems for later. The first League of Villain member to come out was Toga, who apparently was constantly high on murder or blood or something as she effectively skipped out. She went behind the counter to grab a bowl and some Fruit Loops, and began making her own food. Thankfully, she basically left Izuku alone as she ate them using a pocket knife. The next few were Mr. Compress, Magna and Twice. Each had a similar breakfast, but eating in their own dramatic styles. Mr. Compress ate using a fishing wire, proclaiming it to be a performer's touch. Magna seemed to be eating the most normally, and Twice was eating using a fork in one hand and a spoon in other, the two pieces of cutlery seemingly engaged in combat. None talked to Izuku, who wasn't really hungry, but again, adrenaline. Izuku was content to hum quietly, happily being ignored by the villains. Soon after, Kurojairi walked out, and the villains all said good morning to him. His reaction was little more than a grunt as he began rummaging through for some painkillers for his hangover, and then some more alcohol. Izuku thought for a moment, and decided to file that information away for later use. The last two people to come out were Shigaraki and Dabi. Shigaraki being such a late riser surprised him, but at the same time made sense. And Dabi, well, Dabi seemed like he might kill anyone that approached him before at least 2 morning coffees. It was unsurprising when he growled at Toga, who joked about swapping their coffee beans for decaffeinated beans. Izuku continued humming, however, with Shigaraki now out, decided to do it a little louder. Not so loud to be pleasant, but just loud enough so you could barely hear it. In other words, enough to be infuriating. As such, and based on Shigaraki's, as Izuku had taken to calling it, gamer BOI, language, he knew exactly how to annoy the successor to the leader of the League of Villains. He started with the Mario theme, but in a slightly different key. And boy did it work. He could see the blue-haired manchild gripping the table slightly, trying not to scratch his neck. Next was, of course, an Undertale song, Bone Trousel. Can't get too annoying too quick. He figured a suitably irritating iteration of the song would be to start every few phrases a half beat too late. Enough to be noticeable, but not enough to be consistent. This worked too, and Shigaraki ended up breaking a glass. Second to last, by this point Kurojairi had become mildly amused and none of the other League of Villain primary members cared, although a very faint buzzing informed Izuku that all for one had connected. Izuku decided to take it up a notch, Megalovania. But the time signature was all messed up. He was doing it in May 4th time. It was infuriating to say the least. Shigaraki nearly dusted the bench and was going through various exercises to try and stay calm. Keyword being try, because Izuku had one last trick up his sleeve, me theme. But the pauses were just a little too long. Not overly long to seem justifiable, but just long enough to question one's sanity. It was at this point that Shigaraki stood up, walked over to Izuku, who smiled, kicked his chair over and left the room. Not what I was expecting, but I'll take it, Izuku thought as he tried shuffling around to sit back up. Eventually, one of the members took pity on him and picked the chair up, returning it to its position, and he could hear a conversation between Kurojairi and All for One. Plans for the prisoner/hostage? Kurojairi asked. Well, he seems to be in surprisingly high spirits, so I doubt we can turn him into a tool in the typical sense. However, he seems to be good for Shigaraki's growth considering the stubbornness of both Shigaraki and Izuku. This could end up going alright. Worst comes to worse, we can turn his quirk into that of Anoma's, but dash. All for One was cut off by Shigaraki kicking the door to the room down. Sorry sensei, I need to use the TV, he called out, pressing some buttons on the television and bringing it where Izuku could see it. The TV was now the central focus in the room, and based on the time of the program it was a little past midday. And he could hear a sigh from Kurojairi as the purple mist went back to polishing one glass that probably had a stain in the glass itself if it needed that much washing. Maybe the lack of sleep was catching up to Izuku. Anyway, point being Shigaraki was forcing Izuku to watch some news program. It seemed to be a televised debate, featuring a top 20 pro hero, a rising pro hero, and several news commentators. Currently, it was regarding Hero Society. But on a banner at the bottom there were several constant updates regarding the camp situation, along with a notification for a countdown for the next debate on the topic of U.A's security and trustworthiness. Izuku kept a smile on his face, but internally he was infuriated. It wasn't anyone's fault the villains attacked them. He gripped the armrest tighter as it became increasingly negative, and the news commentators became increasingly questioning of the security of Hero Society with the prevalence of the League of Villains. His smile began to waver as some of the villains began cackling whilst Kurojairi sighed and began making lunch. Shigaraki, do you plan on feeding our guest? he asked the blue-haired man. Not a chance. Brat can do without. Shigaraki replied immediately, glaring at Izuku. Izuku didn't respond, trying to keep his facade going. It seemed to be working to an extent. However, Mr. Compress seemed to have noticed and whispered to Shigaraki, who smirked. However, by the end of the debate, the conclusion, the heroes managed to convince the news commentators that the fact there was only a single major villain group was incredibly good, and considering that some of their strongest members have been captured, see Muscular, and the Nomus used in the Hosu incident, and USJ attack, they have been considerably weakened and their downfall could happen within the next few years. Izuku's spirit was cemented, and his hands relaxed their death grip on the armrests. Unfortunately, the next debate turned out less well. By the end, the panel members had concluded that U.A's safety standards had become highly questionable, and it would take a lot for the school to redeem itself. Izuku's smile began wavering as U.A became more grilled, and Shigaraki began speaking. See that? Hero Society has begun to fall, and it won't take long to finish. Faith has begun wavering in your precious hero school, and soon there will be a flow-on, Shigaraki proclaimed, beginning to cackle. Izuku just clenched his teeth and glared at the man, when the news channel broke through their thoughts. This just in. U.A has started a press conference, involving the two primary teachers of the classes and the principal of U.A. Tuning in now. The scene changed to the U.A press conference, and despite his situation, Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at his homeroom teacher's blatant irritation in both dealing with the press and having to actually dress up. Although, the press conference itself was less fun to watch. It started off with some basic questioning directed to Nizu regarding future security improvements, which were reasonable if a bit stupid. Reveal the new security upgrades, sounds smart. Then it was questions for Aizawa-sensei. They started with questions for his actions during the raid itself, questioning the idea to allow students to fight. That line of questioning was shot down very quickly, and Izuku smirked at Shigaraki, having had personally taken down Muscular, who was probably the strongest member they had. Shigaraki was clearly agitated, but the questioning continued. The next question was regarding Izuku himself, and he couldn't help but feel offended. However, he was incredibly grateful for Aizawa-sensei's words, putting him at ease and irritating the rest of the League of Villains. So what, taking this brat was for fucking nothing? Daobi screamed, slamming a fist on the table. Yeah, what the hell? Spinner agreed, whilst Kurojiri stood back but ready to deflect any attacks. No. We can still do something with him? Shigaraki spoke surprisingly calmly. What's that? He's useless. Kill him. Twice added his 2 cents as the bickering continued. We see a dash. Shigaraki was cut off when there was a knocking on the door. Kamino pizza! A knocking on the door cut them off. Twice I swear to God if you ordered fucking pizza I will dash. Shigaraki's threat was cut off by the roof being blown off. Holy fuck! Shigaraki screamed as All Might broke down the front wall and several other pros entered through the roof, all led by none other than Neijire! Izuku called out, smiling. She noticed him immediately and landed behind him, grabbing him. Izuku noticed the warmth of her hands and raised a question. Did you break the roof off? Izuku asked, very impressed and maybe a smidge terrified. Not the point right now. We need to get going, she responded quickly. Simultaneously, several other pros had restrained the League of Villains, and once it seemed safe, Neijire wrapped her arms around Izuku. I was so worried, she murmured, ignoring everything else. Izuku wanted to respond, but felt bile coming up in his throat. He turned his head to the side and puked. Izuku? Neijire asked, really worried as he threw up some strange black substance. Several Nomus started coming through a similar substance, and the other members of the League of Villains began disappearing into it. Izuku! Neijire screamed, grabbing his hands as she wrapped her arms around him in an attempt to keep him. He only barely registered that she did, but squeezed her hands. His hands were the last part to be consumed by the black substance, still squeezing hers. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.